Alright guys, BLM here back with a new video, and in this video we're back with another mid-season power ranking for currently airing season of Survivor, where here I'll be talking about my mid-season thoughts on Survivor 48, where obviously over the course of this video, like my previous ones, I will be running through my general thoughts on the season, talk about the boots so far, and then eventually rank the remaining players based on how likely I feel like they are to win the game. Now, I will say, this is actually probably the mid-season power ranking I feel the least secure about, which is funny considering I actually recently made this change to do these after merger story instead of before, because there have been seasons in the past where my opinion just completely changes after mergatory, 46 being a major example of that, to where I do feel like that was a change made to help me get a better read by the time of the video itself, but I do feel like at this point I still don't have the greatest read here. I do feel like we're in a spot where I think there's a decent amount of contenders, people that can theoretically win, but I'm not really narrowed down to even just like a couple people. I do think it is kind of a large range, and to be fair, I think that's a credit to the editing of this season. I do think, again, as much as people criticize Modern Survivor, I do think the editing of Modern Survivor has been very strong. I think this season in particular is one that it's very tough to really parse out who exactly has a winning trajectory, but again, we'll still be talking about it anyway. So again, I will eventually be ranking the remaining players based on how I feel like they are to win the game, but first, let's talk about general thoughts on the season. And Survivor 48 has been actually good. Where again, I think throughout the entire pre-merge, I thought it was a very solid season. I think it is probably the strongest pre-merge of the new era. Again, we had a 3-episode stretch that was very strong. From the Justin boot to the Thomas boot to the Bianca boot, all those episodes were very good. While again, I will have criticisms. I'll definitely talk about in my review about episode 3 and again, how sad it is that this is the state of Modern Survivor. I do feel like it still made for a good television product, and then watching this big blind side and the way that came together was really fun. And then episode 5, again, you have that big moment between Eva and Joe, probably one of the most emotional moments in all of Survivor, along with also a pretty crazy result for that episode. So again, I thought that was a really good stretch. I'll say the first 2 episodes were kind of lacking, but still, I think as a whole, I come out of this pre-merge here thinking of this as, again, probably the best New Era season up to that point. Now, again, Mergatory episode was rough. I think that was the greatest episode in the world. Not entirely bad one, but just one that just felt, again, very lackluster, especially in comparison to the quality of the episodes we had just had. I think this season is set up in a pretty interesting way here. I do worry about how, obviously, we are getting talk about this, like, honesty and integrity and bring that back to Survivor, which again, I don't think is actually the trajectory that we're going on. I'll be very surprised this alliance that has formed actually sticks to the very end. But again, I do think it is a worry that so many people on this season seem to have that style of philosophy that might shake up this end game to make it less interesting. But again, we'll see how it goes. So as of right now, I do actually feel pretty good about it. But again, with that, again, let's talk about the boots so far. Talk about my opinions on them. Starting off with Stephanie, who I was really disappointed to lose right away. I feel like Stephanie is someone that clearly post-show has come off as a really fun character. Someone that could have been really fun in the show. Also a big fan of the show, to where again, I think Stephanie is someone that has a lot of untapped potential, though sadly she gets sniped out right away, and we didn't really even get to see that much entertaining from her from the show, to where, while I know that Jeff did mention on Fire podcast that she's someone that they would think about bringing back, I obviously doubt that would ever happen, but again, I would be pretty happy if it did. Next, moving on to Kevin, who also very shocked to see Kevin go out that early. I mean, Kevin's someone that, again, was on all the previews. He had a pretty big edit in episode 1, mind you, it kind of had to be, but still, like, him going out episode 2 was very shocking to me. I was kind of more expecting him to be like maybe like a mid-merge boot or something, to where, again, him just getting sniped out by episode 2 is insane, though. To be fair, I kind of think he did it to himself. I do think him not siding with Mary and Steph for that first vote was probably the wrong call, but still a player that was fun enough on the show, and someone that, while obviously I would not expect to see him back, would be someone that, again, I also would not be that opposed to see back. Next, moving on to Justin, who, again, is definitely up there with one of the most screw-over players in Survivor history. I mean, while obviously you can criticize him not telling Cedric about him losing his vote, really that was after he had already been put in this position where he was just essentially screwed over by a dice game, plus also being screwed over by shot in the dark, which even in itself is a 1 in 6 chance, where again he just gets so unlucky in how all this plays out. But again, it made for a big TV moment. I think it made for an entertaining downfall for him. Now again, I think Justin on his own right is not the most riveting TV personality, and I don't think he really brought too much from the show, but to be fair, that could be them downplaying his edit because they knew he would get screwed over in this way. But still, spot where again, Justin just seemed kind of bland, and to be fair, I kind of got that read from him in the preseason, but I do feel like from a gameplay perspective, probably one of the better pre-merge players of all time. Next, moving on to Thomas, who also, again, not necessarily screwed, but obviously goes out in a bit of a weird way, getting taken out because of an idol play, and a spot where Thomas is someone that, again, was very fun in the show, a very fun villain, someone that I would love to see back, someone that I know Jeff himself said that they would consider bringing him back, to where Thomas definitely feels like one of the better pre-merge characters in recent years, especially with him talking about doing these more villainous things that we haven't really seen as much of on Modern Survivor, to where while he does end up getting sniped out of the game through an idle play, I did feel like his downfall in this season was pretty interesting to watch, and in general, again, he was a fun character. Again, was disappointing to lose so early. Then we move on to Bianca, who didn't really have much to do on the show for a lot of it. Again, it really felt like most of the content that she got was purely circumstantial because she went on a journey or because she eventually went out. But again, I did feel like Bianca was, again, kind of quieter in the edit early on and felt like a bit of an afterthought on this season. Or I think she got a bit unfortunate by how the swap ended up playing out, her being put on a tribe where Cedric just has these instant bonds with the likes of Mitch and Christy, to where I don't necessarily look at Bianca as a bad player. And again, I think in most worlds, she would be probably one of the most unlucky players booted in the pre-merge. Yet somehow there's people more unlucky than her this season, which is probably more so an indictment against the season. Though, again, I still think Bianca's someone that, again, didn't bring that much to the show, though I think her blind side was one that was pretty brutal to watch with how genuinely sad she was that she left, where I do actually feel for her, especially considering how tangible of a mistake she seemed to make that caused her elimination. But then we talk about the latest boot in Charity, and I think Charity might be one of the worst players of the new era. And again, especially of somebody that made the merge. I mean, she's just in the spot where she doesn't survive a single tribal. She's also in a spot where literally the entire tribe outside of Mitch and maybe Say were in the know that she was going home, and no one fought for her to stay in that spot, to where also she was in a spot where she would have gone home at any other point in the pre-merge had she ever gone to tribal, where, to be fair, in the swap it would have been a little bit up in the air, but at least David wanted her gone. Pre-swap it seemed pretty clear that she would have gone, to where again, I think Charity's game's pretty bad for someone that made it all the way to Mergatory, and especially on a season that, again, the pre-merge boots aren't that bad. I think there's a serious debate. She could be the worst player of the season. Though, again, we'll talk about that when we get to the player ranking. But still, I think Charity's game was really bad. As a character on the show, she was fine when shown. Mind you, she very clearly got a very similar edit to many of the previous Mergatory boots, where in the last few episodes, I thought it was pretty clear that that's where we were heading, to where while initially I did think there was a shot she was getting this like female new era winner edit that faces adversity early on, it very clearly was not going that way. And by the time of Mergatory, she just became the clear boot for this spot. And again, not shocking that she ultimately ends up going. Again, there we go. That's all the boots up to this point. Now let's rank the remaining 12 players based on how likely I feel like they are to win the game. Now, again, this will be mostly an Edgic analysis. There'll technically be some production-based speculation involved as well. But anyway, let's start off the ranking at number 12. The least likely person on this season to go on to win the game at this point does end up being Chrissy. And Chrissy's actually a player that I've been holding out hope for, where Chrissy, while towards the bottom of my power ranking for the entire season, has not been at the very bottom until literally just now. And a lot of the reason for that is because Chrissy, again, had a okay-ish premiere. She was at least there. She at least got to talk about being a firefighter. Again, that's at least something. The problem is, obviously, after that, she's really barely on the show. And when she is, she's shown in a somewhat bad light with her fight with Say. Her content with Mitch at the swap did not feel like it had much depth to it. Or again, something with the new era winners is that a lot of their stories don't typically pop until the merge. Again, I was always holding out for the merge for Chrissy. Yeah, we're at the merge and nothing popped. And I think that's the thing with Chrissy for me at this point, where like I think I'm just out. I just don't think she can win after just not being really focused on the show in any significant way. We still don't know her relationships in the game. And to be fair, I think it's clear based on watching the show what her relationships are, but she's never been able to talk about those relationships. Her relationship with Cedric, which wasn't on the show. Her relationship with David from early on. Even her relationship with Mitch is one that has never been followed up on since the swap episode. Where it sadly just feels like Chrissy is pretty irrelevant to the overall season, to where, again, I think there's a couple paths that this could take. I think she could potentially be the split vote tribal boot, especially the one that doesn't make the jury. Again, typically the person in that slot is a person that the edit doesn't particularly focus on early on. Where again, you have people like a Tim Spicer, a Sifu, even talking about the ones that did end up making the jury. Again, someone like Ryan Medrano had a quieter edit than normal. Same goes for like Nasir and Roxroyd, where, again, I think there is reason to believe that she could be a split vote tribal boot. I think there's also reason to believe that she could be like a boot in the finale. I would be very surprised if she makes it the final tribal. I think typically in recent years, people that make it the final tribal have not gotten like complete duds of edits, to where I do not think that Chrissy is being edited in a way that makes me expect her to make it to the very, very end. And I think it's more likely, again, to probably split tribal boot, possibly just a random endgame boot, or someone that gets screwed over by some sort of like idle play or some other advantage. Again, I think that's probably the trajectory we're looking at Chrissy, where again, not someone I'm looking at as a winner. Next, I'm moving on to 11, another player that also very unlikely they're going to win, but kind of for opposite reasons. That person is Say. And again, Say is in this weird spot where obviously she got so much content. I mean, really across those first like 3 episodes, she has pretty much the biggest edit ever, which is insane. Again, the fact that she's already at almost 50 confessionals on the season is pure insanity. We're getting a lot of Say. The problem is that we're not getting a lot of good Say. Like, we're getting a lot of Say in a negative light, seeing her being confrontational, seeing her in a bit of a dodo way, and her like bragging about the reward, seeing people just openly not like her. And again, that's not a way that they would portray their winner, especially by the time of Mergatory. Again, I do think at this point in particular, again, I think this is just a spot where Say is just overexposed. And again, I think there's reasons to excuse that, considering, again, obviously her tribe went to tribal over and over and over again. And in that world, you can't really hide a character like Say. Yeah, but I think the fact that she's never really given much positivity, it's always negatively tinged, even in this episode where she reunites with Mary, a relationship that Jeff himself seems to be very high on, talks about how he loves their dynamic, which again always implied to me that, oh, maybe they'll work together eventually. But no, Mary just says she doesn't want to work with Say from the offset. And again, I really just don't feel like Say is someone that can go on the win here. I would not be shocked if she's like first juror. I think that would make a lot of sense. Also, I would not be shocked if she is losing finalists. I also would not be shocked if she's simply just like a Venus-style character, one that's just taken out along the way. But really, in general, I do not have much of a read on where exactly Say lands, but I do not think she is somebody that has any real chance at winning the game. So because of that, for me, she's here at number 11. Now number 10, moving on to a player who has been actually at the bottom of my power ranking for a bit now, but also one that just has one of the weirdest edits I've ever seen, and that person is Cedric. And again, Cedric's edit is bizarre, where I really do not understand what they are doing with Cedric. Where Cedric is a player here that is obviously very integral to the season. He is part of two of the biggest moments of the season up to this point. Again, he is this main decision maker, the only person that can choose who goes home during the episode 3 tribal. Again, a very important spot. Also, this main figure that decides who goes home in episode 5. Again, he's had 2 massive rounds at this point, and despite that, he's just there. Again, he's getting consistent content, but that's because he's going to tribal all the time. But again, it really feels like that content lacks any depth. I feel like we don't really have the greatest sense of who Cedric is as a person or as a player. I will say we did get this moment between him and Star in this episode, and again, that was very strong content there, but it really didn't feel like it led to anything. I just feel like Cedric's edit just feels like it's not going anywhere, and that's what makes me so perplexed about his overall edit, because I just don't know how it's going to end up for him. And it just feels like there's no complexity there. We know nothing about his relationships with anyone outside of Say. Even his relationship with Justin, again, supposedly this very important relationship for him early on, no real setup to that relationship at all. Again, no setup to his relationship with Chrissy, which seemed to be there. Got some setup in terms of his relationship with Mitch, but I do wonder how much more of that is just because of it being good content because of Mitch's story. To where, again, I just think Cedric's just kind of hanging in the game right now, to where I could see a world where he's the final pre-juror. I think that's possible. I also think, again, losing finalists makes a lot of sense, kind of in like a Romeo sort of way, but I just think his edit as a whole is, again, one that's just kind of bizarre, to where I'm not entirely sure what we're supposed to be gleaning from his edit, but I just know that's not particularly likely it's a winning one. Now number 9. At number 9 is somebody that I was actually pretty high on for a lot of the mid pre-merge, where, again, I had this person number 2 at a point across the season. However, I thought they had a pretty bad Mergatory episode. And at number 9, I do have Mary. And Mary's a player here that, again, I thought had a pretty good edit early on. Again, for somebody that was on the bottom, had no real agency in the game. Again, the way that they edited her was as if she did. Again, the fact that they gave her so much credit for her lounging in the ocean and tricking other people into thinking that an idol. Again, the show really props up as this like mastermind move when it didn't work. Like, the point of the move was to split votes that you stay. That didn't happen. To get saved by Shonda Dark. Where, again, I think the fact that felt like very manufactured, and I think it's something that was good for Mary. That's why I moved Mary up quite a bit at that point, especially with her coming off as a very scrappy underdog. I could see this world where they could flip it around coming in the Mergatory. However, after that, again, her edit does kind of fade through the post-swap. She's simply just not as important there. And then we get to the Mergatory now, where she's also just kind of irrelevant. Now, I will say, at least we are seeing her, again, have an opinion, wanting Charity gone, in a spot where Charity does eventually go home. We also do see her kind of leading the Vulas into going that way, to where, again, at least that is something. But I just feel like her content has been just so lacking here, to where, again, I think the thing with Mary is, like, what are her relationships at this point? All we know is her relationship with Say, which is a negative one, to where it's sad that we just never really took the time to really set up any other dynamics with her, even the post swap. Again, that would have been the perfect time to set up these new relationships that she might have, where it seems clear that she has some sort of relationship with the likes of Eva. Yeah, again, that hasn't been shown in the show. But really, Mary just seems like somebody that, again, I think is like an underdog figure, someone that is supposed to be like the yin to Say's yang, yet someone that I just don't think it actually leads to a win. For a while, I do think, again, coming from the Vula tribe, I think it was in a spot where there was this potential turnaround there, but we just never really got that turnaround. I think post-Mergatory, I think it's starting to get a little bit too late for that to finally come. So again, I have Mary here at number 9. Now number 8, and I think this is shocking, this person at number 8, because I think this person was essentially at the bottom of the power ranking for most of the season. However, at number 8, I do have Star. And again, do I genuinely think Star is going to win this season? No. However, this was a pretty good Mergatory episode. And really, it's been a good 2 episodes in a row. I think Star at this point has actually had a competent enough edit to where in a world where the merge is looked at as this like start of Star's story, I think she's had a pretty good start here. Again, like we've obviously seen in recent years that pre-merge hasn't mattered as much, where for most recent seasons, it feels like the true story of the winner ends up starting around the time of the merge. And again, there is a world where that's that with Star. Now, again, I think a big criticism to be had with Star's edit is the fact that it was so negatively tinged before this. I swear, again, I think if she were to go on the win, I would assume they wouldn't portray her as negatively as she was, especially in conflict with someone like Eva, who's someone that we're meant to be rooting for. Though again, they've obviously turned that around in the recent episodes. We obviously see now her and Eva have a pretty decent relationship, and again, I think that's at least redeeming there. And obviously we have this like big moment with her and Cedric, which was really nice to see. I think the problem is, again, we still don't know her strategic relationships in the game. Like while we see her now like and have a kind of relationship with Cedric, that didn't really get that focused on. It's also same thing with Eva. It just feels like she's kind of just there. But I will say again, like in a world where this is meant to be the start of her story, I think the setup is at least there for Star to really pop in the next few episodes. But again, I'm not fully expecting it. I think it's very possible she could be the next boot. I think it's very possible that she could be a boot along the way. Again, I would not expect her to get to the very end, but I think at least these last couple episodes, again, opened up a world for her to potentially win, even though I don't think it's particularly likely. Now, number 7, and now we're getting to the people that I think have a genuine chance at winning. I think these are people that, again, if their edit goes in a certain direction, I would not be that shocked if they ultimately do in this season. However, this is a player that I've always been pretty low on throughout most of the season, even though some people have been high on him. And I will say, like, I do think his merge episode is pretty good, but to me, I think there's still more likely outcomes for him than winner in my mind, and that person is Kyle. And again, Kyle's this player that I think a lot of people saw very highly of. I think it's very clear the edit is trying to make us think of Kyle as a good player. The fact that he does seem to be in the middle of everything. The fact that he does seem to be this main strategic driver in the game. However, that's also a major reason why I don't think he's winning, where I think his edit is simply there because it's kind of necessary. It feels like he needs to be there because he actually is important to the events of the season. It feels like very little of the rest of the content that he's getting is not necessary to the story of the season. And again, because he does come off very circumstantial, especially in all of his edit up until the Mergatory episode, really, I think up to that point, he literally was just there when absolutely necessary. He was there because he wanted that initial journey. He was there because he was in the middle of the tribe. He was there because he was obviously very integral to the vote in episode 4. And then when we get to episode 5, while he's narrating the creation of the alliance on the new Vula, even then, he's the only person to not get personal content in that segment. So again, I think his edit really up until Mergatory here has been pretty bad. However, I do think his Mergatory episode was pretty good in the sense that we get so much of him, so much strategic insight, and gets to reestablish his relationship with Camilla. Again, it feels like there are good signs there, but I still think for me, the main thing with Kyle's edit is that it very much feels like they're propping up as a big player to eventually have a fall. Like, I would not expect Kyle to be able to ride this road the entire way. I think there's a chance he becomes the dragon of the season. I think there's also a chance he's simply like the Charlie of the season, to where, again, this is actually a trend with recent runners-up, is that they are people that get so much focus in the edit, and they're essentially the main narrators of the season. We've literally had this for seasons now. Again, Sam, Charlie, Austin, we're all top of the confessional count by the end of the season. All had relatively shallow edits. I will say Sam not as much, but still like shallower edits than expected for a winner. And I feel like, again, Kyle kind of feels in line with that, to where I would not be shocked if Kyle makes it to the end and ends up losing. I would not be shocked if Kyle becomes this big target towards the end game and him and Camilla end up having their fall. I feel like that's the most likely outcome. To where, again, I just think Kyle, while his episode here was pretty good, and I did actually notice like a bit of foreshadowing towards a Siva win with it being subtitled, one of us is going to win, where, again, I think that's a good sign for Kyle, but again, I still don't feel like this is a winning story for Kyle. I do think he is still a very likely loser, either at Final Tribal or getting sniped out before that, to where, again, I do not have faith in Kyle to win, but I would say, again, it is theoretically possible. There, again, I think he plays into the theme of partnerships. I think it's a lot of strategic insight with him also having, again, a pretty good Mergatory episode. I just think as a whole, again, would not bank on him winning. Now, number 6, moving on to another person, also kind of lower on my board than I see a lot of people. A lot of people have this person at number 1, number 2, which, again, this is another person ripe to be a losing finalist, and that person is David. And again, David is someone that I was starting to go higher on in the last few episodes. However, really more so than even Kyle, I feel like David to me screams out as losing finalist. Like, he screams out as the Sam of the season, Charlie of the season, the Austin of the season, this person who has, again, a lot of narrational content. Would not be shocked if by the end of the season he is the top confessional getter of the season, but also one that probably doesn't have the respect to win a jury vote. So I think David's one of these players that if he gets to the end, I think he'll be criticized for trying to talk about honor and integrity and go on to lose the game because of that. Well, also, I just think edit-wise, he feels in line with most of these other recent runners-up. And I do feel like David is somebody that I see a lot of people having super high on their boards, and I don't really see it. And I do get that he is, again, getting good narrational content. He does have set up relationships. He has a relationship with Eva, now a set up relationship with Joe, has a set up relationship with Kyle, even though even that one's kind of flimsy. But still, it's like, I think David clearly is our main narrator of the season. I think he's someone that the producers seemingly like. I think he's someone that, again, likely gets towards the end, if not to the end. But I just do not think he is winning this season. I think it's, again, a spot where, while I would not like completely rule it out, I do feel like everything just feels in line with the losing finalists. I would not personally bank on him ultimately winning this season. Now, number 5. Now we're moving on to a player that I was actually coming into this episode expecting them to have this big breakout merge episode, be number 1 in my power ranking. Instead, they kind of flopped. And that person is Camilla. And Camilla's this player that, again, I feel like she's had a solid edit, especially with a pretty big uptick towards the end of the pre-merge. But again, I was expecting her to have this big breakout episode of Mergatory. Again, Mergatory, which again is a very important episode for recent winners. Again, we saw Rachel have her big pop at the very beginning of Mergatory, where she got her set up relationship with Andy and getting to talk about the Annika boot. You had Kenzie, who had a big merge episode and her being propped up as this big underdog. You had Marianne had a big merge episode where she was shown to be making all these connections at the merge. And while obviously you have the likes of, again, Erica, Gabler, Jam getting a lot of content at the merge as well. Again, to be fair, those were a lot more circumstantial. But still, it's like, I feel like the merge episode is this very integral episode for the eventual winner. And we just simply didn't get much from Camilla. She's kind of was overshadowed. Again, instead we got so much content from Kyle. Kyle is the one that got to narrate their entire dynamic. And to be fair, that's the way it's been. Like, Camilla has always been kind of in the shadow of Kyle from an edit perspective, but I feel like this episode made that even more apparent. The fact that Kyle was, again, essentially the main narrator of this episode, and Camilla was just kind of there. Got like 2 confessionals. One of them was just about the reward, and again, the other one not really having much substance, to where, again, just felt like Camilla had such a lacking Mergatory episode, which is very disappointing, considering I do feel like her edit was, again, on the uptick. I thought she had a solid enough premiere. I thought she came out of that episode looking like the most likely of the Sivas to win. Again, got to set up a relationship with Kyle, was shown a strategic player. And then by the time of the swap, again, obviously her and Kyle get this big mastermind edit for the Thomas blind side, and then last episode she got her bevy of personal content and was one of the ones to narrate the creation of that alliance. So again, I thought that was all very good content. The problem is that's followed up by nothing here at Mergatory, a very integral part of the season, to where, again, I think that is such a major ding against her edit for me. Now, again, it's not completely damning, because again, I think that she could theoretically still win. However, again, I think the point that I'm at now, I think she's much more likely, again, like the dragon of the season. I think her and Kyle are probably going to be running the early portions of the merge and eventually have their comeuppance. I think Camilla, again, seems kind of in line with someone like an Omer. I could see that being her trajectory, being one of the last few boots before the end, being taken out as this big threat. Also, I could very much see this being like a Charlie and Maria dynamic, where, again, Kyle gets to the end, losing finalists, where Camilla's the Maria that gets sniped right before the end. Again, I just do not feel like Camilla seems particularly poised to win the game at this point. Now, again, not completely ruling it out, but I do feel like based on the edit, her edit is just a bit lacking at this specific point. So, again, had to drop her to here, number 5. Now, number 4, moving on to a player that I think some people are sleeping on. I think this is a player that I see a lot of people just writing off completely. Yeah, again, I don't think this person's completely dead, and I think, again, this could be the potential start of their story. And at number 4, I do have Mitch. And again, Mitch is in this spot where we're getting consistent content from Mitch, but very little of it really standing out outside of obviously stuff talking about his own personal experience, where we obviously got this segment about his relationship with Cedric, we got his setup of his relationship with Charity, and we got a lot of content about him talking about his backstory. Though, really outside that, Mitch has been just kind of a constant presence, but one not super integral to the goings-on of the game. However, that's not bad in the modern day. Again, I think really up to this point, is Mitch's edit really that different from Rachel's coming into the Annika boot? Where really for me, that's the thing with Mitch. At this point, I'm looking at this as the potential start of his story. We'll have to see how next episode goes, and that's really the big determining factor. Where, again, Mitch's edit is one that, again, it could theoretically start next episode. It could also theoretically end next episode. Again, Mitch being first juror is also not that unlikely of a situation as well, but I do think people are completely writing off Mitch's edit in a way that I do find a bit strange, considering, again, we've seen these style of edits go on to win now. Again, having this, like, fake adversity and the fact that there was talk about targeting him over Charity in episode 2 that never seemed to be really what was going to happen. We, again, at least see some fundamental relationships with him early on. He still is, again, narrating certain scenes. Again, I do think people are sleeping a bit on Mitch here and his chances of winning, though, again, his chances of winning are purely determined by how next episode goes. Again, it's a spot where I just simply don't know where to land him on at this current point. Again, I do still feel like he has at least a chance at winning, but again, based around the current edit of the season, I just feel like he's kind of a player a bit in limbo. But because he's in limbo, I do feel like I have to put him relatively high here. With this, again, not being that dissimilar from the spot I had Rachel last time during the last midseason power ranking, where, again, it started to be this point where it started to uptick. So, again, because of that, I have Mitch here at number 4. Now, number 3. And I think this is a very tough top 3 here, where I'm not 100% solidified on where these players should land. But at number 3, I'm going to go somebody that I think a lot of people have at number 1. A lot of people have this person super high, and I've never seen it, though I do think this was a good merge episode for them. That person is Xiaoheen. And, again, I like Xiaoheen. Again, I obviously picked him as my winner pick. I do really like him. I do not know what people see in Xiaoheen's edit, though. Where Xiaoheen's edit is just very bland in the fact that, yeah, he's a constant presence, but he's not really one that has like that much true complexity to him. I feel like a lot of his early content was just him kind of being there with kind of very loose setup to his relationships. Again, despite him and Joe seemingly working a lockstep, we never really got that foundational scene. It was obviously given to a certain other person, all while also the formation of the California Girls, where again, his entire edit early on was based around the California Girls, only for that alliance to be done by episode 4. Again, I think that's also very bad. And really just in general, like up until the swap, it really just felt like he had a bit of a circumstantial edit. Like it's a spot where like I don't know what his story on this season is. Again, in a season supposedly about duos, he doesn't have a duo. Never even bothered to set up one with him, where he was just kind of dangling in the game. And then we get to episode 4, which was a complete disaster. Again, a atrocious episode, one that showed him being so overconfident constantly for no reason, to where, again, obviously it's like you can claim that this is like the forced adversity that a new era faces typically, and that's what they're trying to do there, but they did not have to go as ham as they did on how negatively Xiaoheen was portrayed there. I feel like, again, it's very different from the negativity that we'd get from other previous winners, where really the only one I think you can truly compare it to is Gabler in getting this like over-the-top negativity. But even then with Gabler, he would then be able to rationalize it immediately afterwards. He would get this like confessional talking in a more positive light not too long afterwards. By the end of the episode, this was just an outright completely negative Xiaoheen episode of him being completely dunked on for being too overconfident. Well, also, again, showing him, like, looking through Kyle's bag and not finding it, and Kyle saying, how did they not find it? And, again, it just feels like they're showing Xiaoheen as a bit of an idiot throughout this entire episode, which, again, I just don't think is the way they would want to portray their winner, even in a world where, again, we've had all these, again, pre-merge winners that have faced off against adversity. It was the only one, again, that was in a spot where they were portrayed as actually, like, bad was Gabler, and I guess Marianne, but outside that, it was always perceived as they were a threat. Again, but you have, again, the likes of Erica, you have the likes of Kenzie, who got this, like, pre-merge negativity, but it was because there were threats in the game. Oh, well, Xiaoheen's here is just, again, him being portrayed as a massive dodo. Again, him getting a very like Drew Christie style edit in that spot, which again is very strange for someone that you're planning on going on the win. Now, again, obviously since then he has gotten a good rebound. Episode 5 was pretty good for him. He got his personal segment there. And again, I think you can argue that episode 5 is like the start of his story. My question though is still, what is his story? I don't know what his story is. He's just there and is a strategic player. And I just don't really know what his trajectory in the season is. Where again, we obviously got a good Emergatory episode for him. Again, got a lot of narrational content, got to explain what was best for his game, got his way by the end. But again, I just don't know what his story is. So again, maybe that story starts soon, but again, it just feels like more so that Xiaoheen's just this player that is playing aggressively, that is eventually going to be looked at as a threat, as we see in the upcoming episode, and probably get taken out before the end. Again, even also a chance of him being this losing finalist. But again, I do not really get winnery vibes from him. Though I will say, again, if you take out episode 4, it actually isn't that different from a typical winner edit. Again, one that, again, has you kind of like middle of the road in terms of amount of content, and then also getting your way at points. Again, it is actually like not that far away from a more traditional winner edit, but episode 4 is just so atrociously bad to me. And again, obviously, again, like Survivor has changed up their editing style here and there. It's not like people have this like lasting opinion of Xiaoheen about how bad of a player he is in the way they do with Gabler, where again, that was a big thing with Gabler at the time, is that I think they realized that they made Gabler look too bad to where people were not satisfied with the ending. I think they're actively trying to avoid that sort of situation now. And again, I think with Xiaoheen, at least, like, again, I don't think people seem to have this big takeaway that Xiaoheen's a bad player because of episode 4, but I do think it's a spot where, again, I just do not think they would want to dunk on their winner that much. So again, I'm still leaving it open to where he could potentially go on to win the game. I just think that episode 4 in particular, something that is steering me away, so I have him here at number 3. Now we're at the top 2. And the top 2 is very weird in the sense that I think both of them have their flaws edgically, but to be fair, everyone has their flaws edgically. Obviously, as I've talked about, I don't think anyone here has this like clean edit. So I've actually had these two as my top two for most of the season. There's only one episode along the way where one of these people was not in the top two, but at number 2, I am going to go with Eva. And again, Eva to me is a player that is more in line with a New Era winner in comparison to Xiaoheen. Again, Xiaoheen obviously, again, has that bit of negativity, but again, it's negativity that's showing him as an idiot. Eva has that negativity, but it's one not as focused on as Xiaoheen's was, where again, it felt like the entire episode was spent dunking him. But also with Eva, obviously, it plays into her story. And again, we get talk about how Eva's a threat, which, again, isn't the worst thing in the world to be happening early on in a New Era season, where I think in terms of those aspects of her edit, I think things are fine. Also, again, we get a lot of focus on Eva's relationships. We obviously get a major focus on her relationship with Joe, which, again, I was worried coming into Mergatory that this would become very circumstantial. Yeah, it still feels like they're putting a lot of importance into that relationship coming into the merge, where, again, I think that's a good sign for her. Also, her relationship with David. Again, that was a major focus in the edit as well, and still there at this point. Also, she has her setup relationship with Star, and it feels like Eva just has so many relationships that are seemingly going to matter on this season. I feel like it is very clear that she is a major focus on the season. I would be very surprised if she's not a player that makes it deep and ends up being a major player by the end game. Also, obviously, there's this like foreshadowing with Joe about how he's willing to risk his game for her. So I would not be that shocked that that comes to play a factor down the road. The thing is with Eva, though, I'm not sure if she's someone that is likely to win if she gets to the end. Like, obviously, she has this great story, and obviously everyone is sympathetic towards it, but I don't know if it's necessarily a spot where people are going to respect her game if she gets to the end, where I could definitely see this like kind of Carolyn style trajectory for her. And obviously, there's a world where she just simply is the person that becomes a big target and gets taken out before the end, which I think is probably the more logistical way of looking at her run at this point, considering her current position in the game. Again, either way, though, I do feel like she's clearly an important player in the game. One that I think a lot of her negatives are easily brushed off. I think the fact that she has this like very consistent edit constantly in the show, it has some of these like New Era trends that would lead to an eventual win, and obviously it like has so many setup relationships, especially her relationship with Joe. That is clearly one of the most important of the season. Again, I think that is something that really elevates Eva the B at number 2 here. However, for me, I do still see this trajectory of her potentially being this like Carolyn that gets the end and doesn't ultimately win, which is the main thing sticking out for me of her having here at number 2. Now, number one player on my mid-season power ranking has been number 1 on my power ranking literally the entire season. And this might come off as a little bit of a surprise. And obviously, again, there's some people that are high on this person. There's other people that don't really have him anywhere on their boards. And I do think from a pure Edgic perspective, again, him at number 1 is a bit questionable, but I'm taking some out of the game notions into this as well. And at number 1, I do have Joe. And again, Joe is a player here that I think very clearly, based on the edit, is in it for the long haul. I think he's a player that clearly is getting so much focus on in a way that isn't overbearing. Obviously, his relationship with Eva is something that is meant to be very important. We now see his relationship with David as something that's set up. I will say a criticism for Joe is the fact that I feel like his relationship with Xiaoheen is a bit underdeveloped. Considering they were in the California Girls, I feel like, again, not great. And I think another criticism to be given is the fact that we got no reaction from him after Thomas boot. Though, to be fair, we never really got to see his connection with Thomas, which, again, is also potentially a criticism. But, again, I think that's because a lot more of the edit is focused around his relationship with Eva. Now, beyond that, I think he had a pretty solid first few episodes. Like, now, I think another criticism of Joe's edit is obviously the fact that it is more over the top. He isn't really given much true complexity. And again, I was very worried that coming into his Mergatory episode, that episode 5 would essentially be the end of his edit. That would be the big moment for him, this big moment between him and Eva. And then after that, it would just kind of fade to the sidelines and Joe would be have irrelevant. But instead, he gets a pretty good merge episode. Again, his merge episode is one where, again, we reestablish his relationship with Eva. We get to see his relationship now with David. Also, felt like he was protected during the episode where, again, Vula came off very overconfident. And he was the only one to not get that much content there, which again, I think most people look at as a criticism, but the fact that, again, Vula was clearly meant to be looked at as these idiots who are too overconfident. The fact that Joe got very minimal content in episode 4 and was not part of, again, how overconfident they were, I think is definitely a positive there for Joe. Now, again, I think a criticism that is being made is the fact that Joe got no confessionals in episode 5, the episode where the Eva moment happened. And again, I don't look at that as that major criticism. While yes, I believe actually since Marianne, I don't believe a winner has won the game after having a 0 confessional episode. But realistically, I don't think Joe needed a confessional in that episode. He was all over that episode without any confessional. And he literally got his entire background being talked about. Mind you, it was through a camp life scene, but again, does that really play that much of a factor of whether or not he gets a confessional in that moment when he's such a major focus of that scene? Also, he was a major moment of the Eva moment, where again, he gets to talk through what he was thinking during the Matt chat, to where he also didn't really need confessionals during that moment. To where again, I don't personally have a qualm there with him having a 0 confessional episode there, but I will say that he is obviously a quieter edited player for this big alpha guy that goes on to win the game, and I think that is definitely a fair criticism. Though it does kind of remind me a bit of Tom Westman and how Tom Westman was portrayed. Mind you, again, for fully banking him winning on like them doing a a Tom Westman style edit. Again, I think that's not something that we can't really guarantee, but I do feel, again, this is not that different from Tom Westman, who, again, was not the main character early on, but again, was present, being shown very positively, like ridiculously positively across the early portions of the season, but doesn't really get this big uptick in content until around the mid portion of the season, which again, I think is kind of reminiscent of what we're getting from Joe. I would not be shocked if Joe becomes a major character in the edit down the road. And again, that's kind of what I'm banking on if Joe were to win. Obviously, if Joe goes through the next couple episodes and has no content, obviously at that point, I would be pretty low on Joe. But I think at this current point, again, right after Murgatory, I think the signs are there. I think a lot of the negatives of why he wasn't given like as much content as he could have in the post-swap are, again, excusable. I do think his Murgatory episode was very good, and I think his early content was pretty good. But either way, even if Joe does not go on to win the game, I think they clearly love Joe. And again, I am actually taking in some out of the game factors into my assessment of Joe here. Where again, there are claims that production loves the season. Which again, I think they would love it if one of Joe or Eva were to go on to win. Obviously, that being such an important storyline, they're really focusing on in the marketing of this season. Again, the fact that they showed episode 5 again, I think is a major indicator of that. Also, beyond that, Joe was all over the preseason press. Again, he's someone that Jeff mentioned as a player to watch out for. Mind you, he also did mention Eva, Camilla, and David, but either way. Also, talked about how this is a season of partnerships, where obviously this Joe-Eva partnership is one that clearly is set up to be this lasting impact of this season. Also, Joe, again, got major focus in the introduction of the season. Again, gets this big first emotional moment of him crying over how proud his kids would be of him. Also, in the trailer for the season, he is the first person to talk. He is the last person to talk. So again, I think it's very clear that they adore Joe. And I think Joe is somebody that production would be very happy if he were to go on to win. And again, when production likes a season, it typically is because they are very happy with the winner of the season. Again, production cares a lot about the eventual winner of the season. I think that is a major influence here in me having Joe so high. I'll also mention the fact, though, that Joe does have, again, some foreshadowing. Obviously, he does talk about when we get set up his relationship with Eva, he does mention that he'd be willing to risk his game for her, which again, I know a lot of people have brought this up as a potential situation where he could be someone that essentially sacrifices his game for her, someone that might like throw himself in the fire and potentially lose. Again, that's definitely a possibility. I would not personally bank on it. I feel like all this content is really more so there just to show Joe as a great person, where I think that's clearly a major aspect of Joe's edit is that they spend time over and over and over again reiterating how good of a person Joe is, and not just in terms of his relationship with Eva, but also again constantly getting to talk about his kids, now us seeing his backstory in episode 5. Also again, him setting up this like bonfire for the tribe and calling them his family and back on Logi, where again he clearly is, again, if not somebody that is going to go on to win, someone that production clearly adores. So well, again, there are definitely a lot of holes in Joel's edit. Again, the fact that, again, a quieter post-swap as this like kind of seeming foreshadowing to him being willing to sacrifice his game. Again, his relationship with Shaoqin and Thomas being a little bit underdeveloped. I still feel like at the end of the day, Joe is the person I do have the most faith in on this season. I feel like he fits into what this season seems to be about, while also, again, still having the set up relationships necessary and also seemingly having a long-term storyline to where I personally would be mind blown if Joe is not there by the time of the finale. I feel like he definitely screams out as a player that does make it very deep into the game. And I think he's somebody that, again, if he were to get to the end, I think he ultimately does win. So again, I do have Joe here, number 1. But there we go. I mean, that is my mid-season power ranking for Survivor 48. Now, obviously, again, I will be doing a review and player ranking when the season concludes. Hopefully I can finish it in time. Obviously, coming up, we do have Australian Survivor wrapping up soon. I'll be doing a review and player ranking of that. I also plan doing a review of Challenge All-Stars Rivals, though I'll be honest, that'll probably be a bit late considering, one, the season's ending a bit earlier than expected, but also I literally haven't started it yet. So again, it'll be out eventually. Also, I will be doing an Amazing Race 37 review if I finish it in time as well, where, again, expect those videos coming up. Obviously, we're also in limbo here, waiting to see the finalized cast for Survivor 50, to where once that happens, obviously, you can expect some Survivor 50 related videos. Again, likely not any until that point, but again, either way, obviously, outside of that, again, just more of the typical style of content for the channel. Again, any videos I've finished early will be available on the $5 membership tier if you want to watch them there. And also, I'll keep on my current opinions on the reality TV landscape. You can follow me at Twitch at twitch.tv/review, where I stream at around 11 p.m. Eastern time on Saturdays and Wednesdays, so you can catch me there. But for now, again, those are my opinions on Survivor 48. Thank you for watching.